I had stereotyped in my mind. I knew how they walked, how they talked, how they were going to treat me, their attitude towards me. And I just couldn't have been more wrong. I mean, my running joke is all 8 of them looked me in the eye and called me sir. And in 25 years now of cooking in kitchens, I've been called a lot of names, a lot of language, a lot of kitchens, just not sir.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Henry's Uncle podcast. Today, we're not talking about drugs, alcohol, addiction, or recovery. We're actually going to talk about an amazing restaurant and nonprofit in Dallas, Texas that is changing the lives of many youth through their amazing program. I'm going to pose a simple question to you. Did you know on any given day, nearly 60,000 youth under the age of 18 are in juvenile jails or prisons? Me neither. In fact, the U.S. has the highest rate of youth confinement of any developed country. And have you ever thought about what happens to these young teenagers and adults after they are released? How do they find work, housing, etc.? That's why I'm so excited. I got the chance to talk with Chad Hauser, founder of Café Momentum in Dallas, Texas. Chad talks about how he started Café Momentum, which is a really wonderful story, and what the program entails, working with the youth coming from juvenile detention centers and how these young adults are changing his life. It's an incredible story, and I really urge you to take a listen. Today, I'm really excited. This whole interview started with an inadvertent text from a friend whose sister-in-law works at this wonderful nonprofit. And today we get to talk with Chad, who is the founder, and I will let him introduce himself.
Good afternoon. My name is Chad Hauser, and I am the founder of Café Momentum in Dallas, Texas, and subsequently our new organization, Momentum Advisory Collective.
So, Chad, like I told you before this podcast, this whole thing was totally inadvertent. My best friend's wife sent this text out saying, "Hey, look at what my sister-in-law's nonprofit, what they're doing, and who they're partnering with." And this whole nonprofit just piqued my interest immediately for what you do. And I would love for you to explain what Café Momentum is and what you guys are doing in your community and truly making a wonderful impact.
Café Momentum is an award-winning restaurant. In fact, we just celebrated our 6th birthday last month. And over the course of the last 6 years, we have been consistently ranked as one of the best restaurants, one of the top restaurants in Dallas, Texas. And we do take a lot of pride in that, most importantly because it proves that our staff can and will rise to whatever level of expectation is set for them, as long as we're giving them the tools and resources, support, and opportunity to do so. And that's because our restaurant, in addition to being an award-winning restaurant, is a 12-month paid post-release internship program for young men and young women exiting Dallas County juvenile detention facilities.
So you guys are ranked one of the top restaurants, and with that are young men and women who are coming out of the juvenile system and get this 12-month paid internship, like you said, and they get to learn the ins and outs of just basically running a restaurant.
On the surface, yes, but once we start to kind of dig in a little more, there's a lot more to the organization itself. Over the course of the 12 months, the young person is working their way through every station in the restaurant so as they're learning new life skills and social skills, they're able to apply them to the unique environment of each one of those stations. As I like to say, one of the things we focus on teaching them is how to disagree appropriately, and the way in which you would appropriately disagree with a fellow line cook in a kitchen when you're trying to get food out for 15 tables at once is very different than the way in which you would appropriately disagree with a customer that sat down 10 minutes ago, ordered 3 minutes ago, and is already complaining that they've waited 45 minutes for food. At which point I say, "Dad, relax. It'll come out as soon as we can get it done." Just kidding. The second thing they're learning is what are their strengths? What are they good at? I think for a lot of them, through circumstance of life, have never been afforded the opportunity to say, like, I like doing this or I'm good at doing this, because they've just been focused on surviving and getting by. And then the third thing they're learning is what it means to be a team player. And I think, in the most traditional senses, we look at how do I contribute to my team? So like when you're washing dishes, if you're not performing your job and getting it done successfully, you're literally affecting everyone else in the restaurant's ability to succeed. But I think just as equally important for these young people is the idea that what a team does for them. and the idea that there's a team that's rallying around and doing their job to set them up for success too. And what that feels like is just important as the other way around. And while all of that is going on, we have a community services center adjacent to the restaurant that houses our case management team, our staff psychologist, education coordinator, program director, curriculum coordinator, which is our team that is focused on building an ecosystem of support around our young people so that we are holistically addressing those issues and barriers that had previously pushed them on a path to detention. So more than just employment, we're a source of stability and foundation building, and in a lot of cases, healing from life's previous traumas to help them achieve their full potential in life.
That's awesome. Especially what you talk about, therapy and just the holistic approach, because Henry's Uncle nonprofit, we've, focused on addiction. And so when people don't get, address their actual, what is driving them to their addiction, you see relapse, you see death, et cetera, so on, just like, what you're doing. That's really great to hear that, you're addressing their mental needs as well. On the website, Momentum Advisory, you're a award-winning chef in the Dallas area. I got to imagine that's a very hard thing to do for the robust scene down in Dallas. What made you go from being this award-winning chef to now you're having award-winning restaurants, working with kids coming out of the juvenile system?
Luck and happenstance. For a little bit of context, in 2007, I sold my house, took all the equity out of it, took out a loan, and bought into a restaurant in Dallas because my goal in my career was to own a restaurant and be the chef of the restaurant. And in 2007, I did it. I became co-owner of a restaurant in the uptown area of Dallas, and in 2008, received a nomination as Best Up-and-Coming Chef by a prominent local publication here in Dallas. And in spite of the recession, had grown the business almost 40% in my first year of ownership. And for me, I was pretty happy. I was on cloud nine. I did it, But it was literally right at the 1 year mark of ownership in June of 2008 that I was volunteered to go teach 8 young men inside a juvenile detention facility here in Dallas to make ice cream for an ice cream competition at the Dallas Farmers Market. And it was an incredible and humbling experience in so many ways. Starting with the fact that the moment that I walked in and met these 8 young men, I felt some of the greatest shame I've ever felt in my entire life, because the moment I met them, I realized that I had stereotyped them and I was wrong.
I was going to ask you about that. What were your thoughts going into the juvenile? Because, just again, many people who think of, people who are using drugs, there's that stereotype, right? What were your thoughts walking into that juvenile center?
It's a great parallel. I think the words that come to mind are punk, thug, gangsta, hood. And, I had stereotyped in my mind. I knew how they walked, how they talked, how they were going to treat me, their attitude towards me. And I just couldn't have been more wrong. I mean, my running joke is all 8 of them looked me in the eye and called me sir. And in 25 years now of cooking in kitchens, I've been called a lot of names, a lot of language, a lot of kitchens, just not sir. But it was humbling. I mean, I thought I was a better human being. And when literally confronted face to face, I realized I wasn't. And that humility led me to spend the next several hours not so much teaching them to make ice cream, but more importantly, listening to them, listening to them tell me who they really were, how they really were, why they really were. And 2 days later, the county bussed them down to the farmers market, and they're competing against college culinary students. And one of those young men actually won the whole contest. And when he won, he was so excited. And, he's screaming at me, I just love to cook. And so I just love to make food and give it to people and put a smile on their face. And I just remember thinking, how dare you ever stereotype this sweet young person? And then he said, when I get out, I'm going to get a job in a restaurant and ask my professional opinion on whether he should work at Wendy's or Chili's. I, of course, professionally told him, whoever hires you first. And I drove home that day. He was so excited, and I was so excited. And I got my truck and I started driving home. And I just started thinking about his story. And I just started to realize he's never going to make it to a Wendy's or Chili's. And then we can look on the surface and say it's because he's going to go back to the same house, the same street, the same neighborhood, the same school. All of these issues and barriers that had previously pushed him on a path of detention. But as I dug a little deeper and started thinking about 16-year-old him and 16-year-old me, I began to realize that for both of us, our lives were dictated by choices that were made for us before we were ever born. Choices that society makes for us based on the color of our skin, or the socioeconomic class we were born in, or the part of town we were born in, the school that we have access to, the healthcare we have access to, the food we have access to. Neither one of us made those choices, and I certainly did not do anything in my life to deserve the luxury and privilege of the choices that were made for me. And he certainly didn't do anything in his life to deserve the absence of those opportunities and resources. And I just remember thinking, that's not fair, and that's not the world I want to live in. And that was it. That was, for me, that was the moment of, turning a blind eye, walking away and pretending like it doesn't exist, or leaning into it, listening more, learning more, and figuring out where and how and what my role is to be a part of something different.
I just took some notes from your website because I had no idea. I got into this. I started doing some research about America and imprisonment and how we had the highest incarceration rate in the world. But going to your website, just some simple statistics that right there in bold was we have the highest youth incarceration rate in the world. Nearly 60,000 under the age of 18 at any one time are incarcerated, and 10% of those youth are held in adult prisons. That was very shocking to me, and it opened my eyes because, again, like you said, when this gentleman walks out of prison, is he going to work at Wendy's or Chili's? But most likely not. When you walk out of juvenile or prison or whatever it may be, you have to put that on your resume. And what's going to happen? You're not going to get hired. There's just no way. And so you already set up with these barriers of, here you are, you served your time, whatever it may be. You come out, you're supposed to start a second chance, but it's hard to get housing. It's hard to get a job. It's just all these extra additional barriers. Again, I didn't realize until I started talking to people like you. And that was very eye-opening when I saw those statistics. 60,000 teenagers, young adults who are in prison for who knows what. Those 8 kids you first met and you heard their stories. What were their stories? The barriers, et cetera, so on.
It's overwhelming. And I don't know if you've ever watched that documentary Waiting for Superman about our education system. And it was the first time I'd ever heard, which has been repeated over and over again, that we study the literacy rates of third graders to predict future prison populations. And what I think that we forget as a society is it's not as if they look at that and then all of a sudden something's done 20 years later, right? Or 15 years later or whatever. It's what's unstated is we've built systems to make sure that those third graders never, ever, ever achieve. So at 7, 8 years old, they are already set up. Their life has been as such that for the first 7, 8, 9 years of their life, they've gone so without that they can't read, and then nothing else changes. And so to me, I don't even know how to describe it. I mean, when I first started doing this work, the juvenile justice industry term that is repeatedly used to describe the population we work with of children is throwaway, which you should never call a human being ever, especially not a child. But what you begin to realize is, it's the scarlet letter they wear on their chest. And what that movie said is they're wearing it at 9 years old. That says, this is who I am, not who I was born to be, and not who I want to be, but who I've been told that I am going to be my entire life. So the idea that we would look at a 17, 16, 15-year-old child who has committed a crime to access a basic resource and think negatively of them is unbelievable, because we're the ones that set them up for that. Just looking at in the last year, 42% of the kids that we worked with came to us homeless, 15, 16, 17 years old with nowhere to call home. And in most cases, they're on their own and by themselves, and we're wondering why they're committing crimes. And then we're punishing them. What message do you think that sends a 17-year-old? You're not good enough to have a permanent place to stay. You are not good enough to be provided with an education. You're not good enough to know where your next meal is going to come from. But when you commit a crime, we're going to make sure and tell you that you're a bad person. Well, you've already done that. You've done that their entire life. So they're literally just fulfilling the prophecy that we've laid out for them since the day they were born. And until we as a society are going to change those very systems that force them into committing these acts of survival, then nothing will ever change.
The kids you work with, what are the basic crimes that you see the most? When they're coming out of the juvenile system, what are the most often crimes you see? Why they went to juvie in the first place?
I'm going to preface this by saying, I do not have any data or statistics pulled out in front of me. So this is all just in my mind, what I see and hear. But most of them are in for some type of robbery or burglary offense, which when you begin to break that down, that is the quickest offense that you can commit to access cash. And I think that that's important to note, because then you have to begin to ask yourself, why are they so desperate to access cash? And it is question number one, right? And then question number two is, why do they feel like the only way they can access cash is to commit a crime? And that's where you begin to listen to the stories, and that's where you begin to understand the things like 42% are homeless when they enter our program. 54% last year were high school dropouts when they entered our program. I mean, they statistically come from zip codes with the highest poverty rates, lowest job rates, lowest high school graduation rates by zip code, lowest housing rates by zip code, kind of, on and on. And I promise I'm going to get off my soapbox here in a second, but then you start, to me, it's one thing to see that. No, it's another thing to continue to dig and dig and dig. And the thing that's overwhelming to me is if you begin to continue studying those patterns across our city, it begins to tell a much greater story. And I'll give you an example. In the city of Dallas, 55% of the population lives north of downtown Dallas, and 45% of the population lives south of downtown Dallas. So we're almost split in half. Now, by race, the 55% that live north of downtown are predominantly white, and the 45% that live south of downtown are predominantly of color. Here's where that becomes incredibly significant, and I think really does a great job of digging into the rest of my story, which is 95% of the jobs in the city of Dallas are north of downtown. 95% of the jobs. So it's the tale of two cities. And so you think about almost half the population of our city lives in an area in which they're fighting over 5% of the jobs. So now all of a sudden it makes sense as to why high school graduation rates are lower. The rates of kidney disease, heart disease, diabetes, childhood obesity are, 8 to 12 times higher than the rest of the city. Why the poverty rate is so high, it's not by accident. And this is the way the system is set up. And it's no surprise that these young men and women that we work with, they don't grow up with a lot of hope or aspirations or inspiration, because they're told from the day they were born they're going to live in a neighborhood where there are no jobs, where it's a federally recognized food desert. They don't have access to groceries, healthcare, anything else. Why would we ever be surprised that anything else is going to happen or be expected of them?
And just to kind of come back at the beginning of this, you said you worked the last year you worked with the kids who came into your program, 42% were homeless.
Yes, sir.
Wow. That's incredible. Yeah, I can, again, it's when you think of 42% of homeless and, kids who need to access cash. I mean, when you're trying to survive, trying to find just a warm, place to sleep or get some food.
15, 16 years old.
Yeah.
And I just thinking back to what I was doing and thinking when I was 15 or 16 years old, I can guarantee you that I was in no position mentally, physically, emotionally to be able to wade through those type of scenarios in life.
Yeah, no, 100% agree, man.
When I think you touched on it at the beginning, whether you're talking about drug addiction or poverty or any of these truly epidemic issues in our country, it's so easy to fall in and it's so impossible to get out.
And what, for these kids who are growing up, what's their home life like? Can you elaborate on that? While like you said, 45%, live south of Dallas, and then only 5% of their jobs are down there. What is their home life like as these kids grow up? Because what I'm kind of getting at is, I found a very interesting statistic is when I saw your website saying nearly 60,000 youth under the age of 18 are imprisoned or incarcerated. Roughly 500,000 to 550,000 kids at the same time on any given day are in the foster care system, and that's why I'm asking. It's a very, I wonder if that has any parallel there as well.
The short answer to the question is it's kind of all over the place. I think the longer answer would be, you have some kids that come from a good home in respects to they have two parents at home, the great parents at home. Parents are struggling to get by because they live in a zip code where there's 5% of the jobs in the city. They're trying to make ends meet and they're fighting with the streets, for the long-term trajectory of their kids. In some cases, it's a single parent home, and you see that in a lot of instances, pertaining to the young men that we work with, they're the oldest child in the household, and they feel a sense of duty and obligation to quote unquote be the man of the house. So at 13 years old, 12 years old, they're trying to find ways to help assist their mom and provide income because I remember one young man talking vividly about what it felt like at 13 years old to see his mom would put he and his siblings to bed early, and by early before the sun would go down, so that they would be asleep and wouldn't realize that they didn't have electricity in the house. And he remembered seeing his mom sitting at the kitchen table by candlelight crying one night, and he thought, I don't want to ever see her do that again. All the way to there are some kids that are just literally on their own, and they are 15, 16, 17 years old, and they have no parental support whatsoever. And those instances, you see it a lot of the times, it's cyclical, where the parent has been in and out of incarceration and is in their own form of survival mode, and that does not entail them being able to care for their children, and by result, their children are in survival mode trying to take care of themselves, and that's how they end up in our program. That's a very long-winded way to say it's really all over the board. I wish there was really one tried and true example, but it's really and truly is just all over the board.
And so when these kids come to your program, what's the recidivism rate, for kids coming out of, juvie versus if they come out and actually go to your program? What are the percentages there?
So just for context, in the state of Texas, almost 50% do youth that end up in detention will reoffend and wind back up in detention within 12 months. Of the over 1,000 youth that we've worked with, 15.2% have recidivated or reoffended and gone back into the system. But even more proudly, over the last 12 months, we've had 0 youth that have faced a reconviction. So we're pretty proud of that. I think what's really telling about that stat, though, is like when you look at the cost to incarcerate, in the state of Texas, it's like $127,000 to incarcerate a juvenile with a 50-50 chance, basically, that they're going to be back within 12 months. And that's another $127,000. And if you come back a second time, you're pretty much guaranteed to spend the rest of their life going in and out, in and out, in and out. So when you look at that and overlay that with our statistics, we've saved Dallas County taxpayers over $40 million since we started doing this. And I think the real telling thing about that is when you say you saved over $40 million, that's not theoretical. That's literal dollars that our county has budgeted over the course of the years to incarcerate youth that they're no longer having to use to put children behind bars.
That is absolutely incredible. I mean, that's a lot of money. That's a lot of money.
I mean, if they would give it to me, I would open 40 more restaurants and then
So, I mean, so you have a tried and true, method here. You said 50% kids who come out of detention get incarcerated again within the next 12 months. And for your program, 85% do not go back in detention within 1 year. That's huge. I mean, that's you go from 15 to 50%. That is really remarkable. And like you said, 0% in the last year have reoffended. So that's very outstanding. And you mentioned you worked with over 1,000 kids so far?
Yes, sir.
Wow. That's pretty telling. Very telling that you give a kid, empower them, give them a sense of duty, a job, and what they'll do with it. That's really awesome. And so when these kids, come into your program, what is, like the first month look like? I'm just trying to think, as a teenager, a young adult, trying to put myself in their shoes of what they've been through. What does that first month look like coming out of detention and into this program where now I kind of, I have to work, I have to be somewhere at a certain time to X time, et cetera, so on?
I heard someone in the juvenile department mention two things that were pretty telling to me. One thing was that for every year of trauma that these young people have come from, it takes a month of therapy to undo each year. So, like, just thinking of in the context of if they're 17 years old and they've gone through trauma for 17 years, it takes 17 months for them just to get back to square one, right? So level zero. But then he also mentioned in the same breath that it basically takes one day. I think he said 1 week of being back in the same environment to undo a month's worth of work that's been put into them while they were in detention. So if you think about, if a young person's been locked up for 6 months, if they don't have some type of intervention basically immediately, it's right back to everything that was going on the moment that they went into detention. So, that's why for us in our program, that case management component is so crucial because, think about it, a young person that gets released and has nowhere to go. They immediately get released and are basically thrown back into a world of survival in which they have to figure out how are they going to access cash, to access housing, to access food, to access healthcare, to access, all the basic kind of necessities. In our case management team, that's their role immediately, is to create that stabilization. So, and our organization focuses on meeting each young person where they're at with their individual needs. So when it comes to housing, our case management team has a whole cadre of different housing partners that we reach out to based on what the needs are, whether it's a temporary shelter, a semi-permanent youth housing facility, whether it's an apartment complex that does reduced rate rents, whatever, kind of their need is. It's why we have partners that immediately provide boxes of food to stock their pantry in their home. So, even if they're going back home to mom and siblings, or mom, dad and siblings, or grandma and grandpa, or whatever, we can get food in their pantry to take some type of weight or burden off of the household. And then even, healthcare, we have a partnership with our county hospital so that not only do all of our interns have access to free medical care, but they have access to an actual primary care physician. And we work to make sure that within the first 6 weeks they've entered our program, they're going and getting a physical, so that on the one end, we're able to address any underlying medical issues that they may have. But on the other end, they're also learning how to self-advocate when it comes to healthcare, because they're seeing how the system is set up and how they can utilize the system to take care of themselves. And, kind of going forward, they begin to self-advocate and access the healthcare system when they don't feel well, which also translates across the household for their siblings and their parents as well. So that stabilization in the first, 30 to 60 days that they come in our program is crucial, because if after that time period, they're still worried about where they're going to sleep at night or when their next meal is going to come and where their next meal is going to come from, then they're certainly not worried about how to disagree appropriately,
Yeah, right. That's, well, kudos to the medical facility. It's, as a 34-year-old, I mean, I have a hard time just trying to access healthcare. It's all over the place. It's very hard to understand. Yes, I've always had been able to go to the doctor and stuff, but trying to find what you need, where you go, all that stuff, it takes a lot of time. It takes resources, and it's difficult. And if you don't have those resources, it's nearly impossible to access what you need. So that's awesome that your nonprofit has been able to partner with a county hospital to do that, and have a physician who will see them at no cost to the kids. That's really cool to hear.
Well, I think it's a game changer, especially going back to the earlier comment I made, where they're coming from zip codes with 6 to 12 times higher rates of diabetes, heart disease, kidney disease. That's a huge game changer for them and their entire family.
So when you get these kids who come into your program, can you kind of walk? It's a 12-month paid internship, but what's that first month like when these kids come in? They have therapy and they go able to see the doctor and stuff. You find housing, but what's that kind of overall sense? I would assume there's a pretty dramatic shift in the way they look from day 1 to day 30, kind of getting everything sorted out.
As silly as it sounds, there's a lot of trust building that takes place. I mean, they're kind of walking in, they're not for anything, but they're used to being kind of used and neglected. So they're coming in And I think the first thought in their mind is, okay, this can't be what they're saying it is. What are they wanting from me? What are they trying to get out of me? What are they trying to take away from me? So I think a lot of those exercises of, addressing housing and healthcare and so forth are all really exercises in building trust, which is to say they're learning they're not in this alone, and that we collectively as an organization are in it step by step with them, and we're gonna remain steadfast in that. And I think it changes everything. They begin to, we talk a lot about, we believe in giving grace because we're dealing with kids that have never been extended grace. So when they make a mistake or they mess up or whatever, we're going to extend them grace so that they can know what unconditional love looks like. But I think after 30 days, they begin to give us a little grace. In other words, like they let their guard down a little bit. If we're not perfect, it's okay because they know that our intent is their best interest.
Is there any penalty for these kids who, let's say if they do reoffend during the time they are in your program, because you're talking about grace, do you extend that grace and say, hey, we will welcome you back in once this clears up? Or is there, these hard boundaries to make sure they are steadfast in what they do for the next 12 months?
So I think the short answer is absolutely. If they reoffend and go back when they get out, they're welcome to come back. I think the extended version is I usually show up in court. Their case manager shows up in court and we advocate for them. I've testified on their behalves because their entire life doesn't course correct in a matter of a day, a week, a month, or really even a year. There's a lot that has gone into them getting to where they are. In other words, in our program. And we can't expect them to just be able to say, oh, okay, great. Then everything's perfect now. Like, everything all my muscle memory from the past has all been evaporated. It's all different. It's all, they're still a work in progress. They're still imperfect. They're still human, and they'll still make mistakes, and for a multitude of reasons. And, we're just going to love them through it. Just like any parent would love their child through it, or just like any family member would love their family member through it. And I think that's a huge thing too. One of our biggest success stories is a young man that, when I tell you, his granny, his pastor, his case manager, me, we were on him 24/7, making sure that, trying to get him to stay out of trouble, trying to whatever. He still messed up and he still went back to detention. And I will never forget, we were recording a video for Starbucks and we were in the juvenile facility, and I asked if I could speak to him, and they brought him out, and I hugged him. He was embarrassed, and I hugged him and I told him I loved him. And when he walked away, on the back of his jail issued uniform, it said honors. He was an honor student. That's how smart he was. That's how much potential he had, that they had marked him honors student in jail. And I testified in court in his behalf. He was the first person I'd ever testified in court for. And today, I'm telling you, he is one of the most exemplary human beings you've ever met. He is training new employees on our Ruthie's Fueled by Café Momentum food truck. He is an incredible father. He's an amazing grandson. He's an incredible boyfriend to the mother of his son. And he's just an amazing human being. And I think, if not for unconditional love and grace, where he could potentially be, is, I think, a glaring example of why it's important that, hey, I love you and I'm going to keep loving you through this. And I'm going to keep believing in you until you begin to believe in yourself. And that's unconditional.
Kudos to you for being a true leader, in terms of, not only taking these kids in and teaching them life skills, but also going to court and advocate on their behalf. I think that in itself is bigger, than a restaurant. Being able to, I can't imagine, being in that kid's position, and then it's like, hey, we've been told to trust, this community, yada yada yada, and then when I'm in my desperate need, no one's there for me. So that's huge in terms of just leadership, and kudos to you. And again, kudos to him, for what he's doing now. That's such an incredible story to hear, teaching employees or training employees, and, being a wonderful human outside of the restaurant, grandson, great boyfriend, all that kind of stuff. So that's great. So as these kids go through, these 12 months, near the end of their internship, do they start to begin? I don't want to say they have this kind of safe zone, but they have this steady employment internship for a whole year. Do they get a sense of panic when that 12-month comes up, or do you guys have a plan for them after that 12-month internship? What does that look like?
Yeah, it's funny when they're in the last couple of months of the internship, they've been doing some resume writing and mock interviews, and they'll begin interviewing with some of our employment partners to begin an externship, which, working part-time with us, part-time with the employment partner, where we can continue to mentor, coach, and support them. And that is meant to ease their transition out of our program and onto the rest of their life. And it's so funny, in some cases, these kids are getting 401ks and paid vacation, and still they're leaving. They're like, "Oh, so you're just going to kick me out? Like, that's it? You just don't want to see me anymore?" I'm like, "I want a 401k too, dude. Like, come on. Are you kidding me?" But it is a hard transition for them. For a lot of them, it's the first, stability they've had in their lives. It's scary to go out into the rest of the world.
Yeah, I was just kind of thinking you see these kids and what they've been through, and then they kind of they get into this safe zone for a year, working, building camaraderie amongst their team, and then all of a sudden that 12-month goes just like that. And then it's like, what do I do now? And that's wonderful that you guys have additional partnerships out there, to keep furthering these kids' education, being able to work, have an income, all that kind of stuff. That's it's got to be very, very stressful that way, when you start thinking that, when you're month 9, 10th or 11th month right there, and it's like, oh, I only have X amount of time until this is gone, because it sounds like a really great place to work. One thing I wanted to touch on, because like you talked about before the podcast, was being a chef or line chef. The whole restaurant is one big team. And I'm just kind of thinking, because I grew up as sports, you get in unison, and things the flow just begins to, it's seamless. But when you add in another player that you haven't worked with, or they're brand new, you're kind of leery, you're on edge. What does that look like in the restaurant? Because how many throughout the year, how many kids do you have leaving, and how many kids do you have coming in, and what does that flow look like amongst the team?
Well, we work with an average of about 150 kids a year, and typically once a quarter we have an orientation class or classes where anyone that's interested in participating in the internship program can come. There's 6 classes that are spread across 2 weeks. And once they complete the orientation, then they can begin the internship. And the orientation is designed to do a couple of things. Number one is it's designed to give them an understanding and insight into who we are as an organization and what we stand for, what our culture is, and what the true opportunity for them is in participating in the program. But then there's also things like, orientation starts at 5:30 and we lock the doors at 5:31. And if you're late, you're considered absent. And if you are absent more than once, then you have to wait till orientation starts again and try over again. And it's not meant so much as a punishment, but just to set expectation, but also to have a different conversation with them in which, we say, hey, listen, we want you to be here, but part of being here is to actually be here on time. So what can we do to help you be here on time next time? And you would be amazed at how many kids that happens to, that just end up showing up 2 hours late for orientation the next go around. Like, I'm not going to risk it. I'm just going to sit here. I'll sit outside and wait. It's no big deal. And then you have some kids that show up for orientation and they're like, nope, this is another BS thing. I don't trust it. I'm not buying it. And then their friends complete orientation and get a $200 bonus on the spot. And then all of a sudden they're working and making $9 an hour and they're having a great time. And, by the way, we have our own school in our community services center. So now they're attending school daily and on track to graduate high school. And then that young person's like, okay, wait a minute. You're getting all of this? Okay, I'm coming to orientation next go around. If you can do this and this is happening for you, then it can happen for me. I'm going to come back and I'm going to do it. And then, of course, once they do start the program, we built out what we refer to as our tiers of success. So essentially, the tiers are designed so that once every 3 or so months, they're advancing tiers, and we encourage them motivate them to advance tiers with a pay raise. So tier 1, they make $9 an hour, all the way up to tier 4, they make $12 an hour. And the tiers are designed to increase kind of their self-advocacy and self-accountability. So, things like, getting a government issued ID, getting a bank account set up, those are all things that they have to do to advance tiers. The accountability of showing up on time more and more increases more and more as they advance tiers. And if they don't advance tiers because they're not going and getting their ID, or they're not showing up on time, or they're, whatever, then the conversation is, hey, listen, I believe in you and I know you can do this, but you're not living up to your end of the bargain. So you're going to have to start over. You're going to have to go back through orientation and start all the way back at tier 1. And for some kids, it takes 2, 3, 4 restarts for them to really kind of get going and understanding. And, some of that's just the natural maturation of a teenager. Some of it's the natural buying in of the program. And some of it's the natural, believing in themselves and committing to themselves and understanding that they get to own their success in our program, that we don't own it. No one owns it. They own it. They get to own it. And it's something that no one can take away from them.
That's really cool. It's funny you mentioned, being on time. I think about this a lot. I don't know why, but one of the greatest values going through high school was if you were not sitting in your desk when that bell rang for class time, you automatically got in trouble. And for me, you never, as a high school student, you're kind of like, oh, this is stupid. I can't believe it. Like, I was 10 seconds late or whatever it may be. But as you go through college, you start seeing the amount of kids who kind of just stroll in late to class, all that stuff, just like, oh, whatever, I'll be 15 minutes late. But just the discipline and just having the respect for the people who are doing what they are doing, trying to help you out, that was so big for me. So when you said, like, if you're not there by 5:30, 5:31, doors are locked, like, it just rang a bell, because being on time and discipline like that is one of the biggest things that never gets mentioned. I don't know why. So I love that. I really do.
I'll never forget the chronic fear instilled in me in my 9th grade physical science class, when the teacher had on the door, better 3 hours too soon than 1 minute too late. and she was so dead serious about it that she would fail you. You were late one time.
Yep.
I have never been so scared, in my life. And then, for the first 9 years of my career, I worked for a caterer. And so everything was based on, if somebody had a party at 6 o'clock, we were supposed to be at their house at 4:30. And at 4:31, if we had not pulled up, that client is calling and panicked because we're not there yet. And were we going to be late? Are we going to be able to get everything set up on time? And there was just that fear of, I'm not living up to my job. But then there was the fear of, they're going to tip you at the end of the night. And if you start off on the wrong foot, then that's going to affect your pocket, your wallet. So it's a real deal. I will tell you, it's funny, when we first opened, so many people would say, but I mean, are they showing up on time? Are they showing up on time? And I remember talking to a friend of mine who owns several restaurants here in Dallas, and, we're about 3 months into the restaurant being open, and he was like, how's it going? How's everything going? How are you doing? And I said, I'm just so tired of people asking me if the kids are going to show up for work on time. Because in my mind, I'm thinking that obviously you don't realize that when you're poor, every quarter counts, every nickel counts, And he just said, next time somebody asks you that, give them my number. Let me tell them how many 40-year-olds show up for work on time.
Oh, man. You mentioned Starbucks earlier, and that kind of piqued my interest. As you continue to evolve, I'm sure this pandemic has slowed things down just a little bit. But where do you see this nonprofit in 10 years? Like, who are you partnering with now? Because it seems like I didn't mention it. I saw you partner with the NFL. I heard Starbucks. So it seems like there are some organizations out there that are really buying into this.
Yeah, that's kind of brings it full circle as to how you heard about us in the first place. The goal has always been to grow and scale and expand, build more programs around the country. I think there's the obvious surface reason of we would love to work with more kids. But, the idea that you're working with a program that works with 150 kids a year, and as you mentioned, at any given day,
60,000
are locked up, and compound that with just over the course of a 12-month period, almost 750,000 have entered or somehow been involved with the system. Building 30 programs over the next 10 years and working with almost 5,000 kids is still a lot of kids that are not being helped. So our efforts and intentions in expanding aren't just to work with more individual youth, but to build conversation and advocacy around the idea that what our model is actually what should be the new model for juvenile justice in the country. The idea that we can use taxpayer funds to no longer take a child that comes from trauma and severe depravity of resources and put them in handcuffs and isolate them and tell them they're bad, but instead provide them with resources and opportunity and love and guidance and support and hope so that they can truly achieve their life's full potential. And that's what our model proves, that when we're providing those resources, when we're providing basic human love and support, and when we're providing, jobs and income, that we can completely change the trajectory of these young lives. And so as we looked to kind of grow and expand and having that in mind, we were incredibly fortunate to befriend former NFL MVP, Sean Alexander, who played just north of your residence.
Yep. I was a big fan.
Yeah, Sean and his wife, Valerie, are incredible human beings, and they learned about our program through one of our funders, Stand Together. And within a month of meeting Sean, I met him in January of 2019. In February, he and I were in the NFL offices talking to them about Café Momentum and serendipitously telling them that, we wanted to do a pop-up dinner in Nashville, Tennessee the night before the NFL draft and wanted them to support the dinner. They jumped on board. And so we did a dinner that April of 2019, the night before the NFL draft, and we had former NFL stars at the dinner and philanthropists in Nashville and policymakers from Nashville and the state of Tennessee. And we had 10 young men that were system involved in Nashville working a dinner and showing that they can and will rise to whatever level of expectation is set for them, all under the auspices that we gave them 4 hours worth of training in 2 days to pull off a dinner. And then we did a dinner in Los Angeles with the LA Rams football team and the NFL Network in September of 2019. And then January of last year, we were in Miami working with the NFL and Players Coalition and doing a dinner in Miami using 12 youth that were system involved in Miami. And the whole time that we were doing that, we also launched a separate nonprofit, essentially the parent company or the expansion arm of Café, and it's called Momentum Advisory Collective. And Momentum Advisory Collective is literally charged with taking this momentum model and beginning to implement it into building programs in different communities around the country. Our goal is to do 2 in 2021, 2 in 2022, escalating up to having 30 programs built across the country in the next 10 years. But most importantly, we are showing that it's not just a restaurant, but it's a new model for juvenile justice around the country, so that we can really start getting into those hundreds of thousands of lives.
Yeah, seriously. Yeah, it's that's really cool. That's awesome how just one group that you work with, you got to meet, Sean Alexander and his wife and what they've done, and then being able to expand. That's so cool. I'm sure those kids were pretty jacked to be serving food to those players and former players too.
Well, and it's so amazing because those dinners are all about them. I mean, you have athletes there and politicians and all these people there, but those kids know that dinner is about them and that everyone's there to see them and everyone's there to support them, and it's just magical.
That's so cool. This whole program, again, like your website and the articles and a couple podcasts I've listened to, it's truly inspiring. It's really awesome how, you went from being this up and coming chef and then just, how one interaction totally, led you to this and now you're changing lives. And, I know in 10, 15, 20 years, the amount of lives you change is going to keep going up and up, and especially the lives you change now, who, those kids are going to grow up and, influence other lives as well. So that's so cool. And it's, again, I'm so glad that Julie inadvertently sent that text message about Café Momentum to the group thread. So first of all, thank you, Julie. But I'm really glad I got to connect and talk to you, Chad. It's honestly one of the coolest things I've heard in the last couple of years. It's truly inspiring.
Well, thank you, Eric, and sincerely thank you for creating this platform. It's really special, and it's really important, and it's really needed.
And one thing before I let you go, where can people go donate or buy merchandise or whatever it may be? If anybody's a foodie out there or wants to support a really cool, amazing nonprofit helping young kids' lives out.
Thank you for asking that question, because I would get in so much trouble for not mentioning it. Our website is cafemomentum.org. If you would like to support our restaurant and program, there's a donate button there. If you want to support our expansion efforts, you can go to momentumadvisory.co for the Momentum Advisory Collective website. And if you want some really cool merch, we have everything from t-shirts and hats all the way to our coffee rub for your steaks and fish and chicken to biscuit mix, etc. That's cafemomentumgoods.com.
That's awesome. Chad, again, thank you for your time. I know you're a very, very busy man. So truly thank you for sharing your story. I hope this story gets out here in the Northwest and more people hear about it as well, for what you're doing. Because I think this is truly a model that can be used around the nation. And hopefully we can start getting these incarceration rates down from 60,000 quite dramatically through programs like this.
Well, I agree. I mean, just thinking about the basic fact that the work that we've done, it's taken about $4 million, maybe $6 million of fundraising to do this work, but we've saved, the return on investment is over $40 million. To me, it's a no-brainer.
It's a no-brainer. Again, like I was so frustrating about, I don't mean to get into the government here, but what's so frustrating about, the government, you see, it's like, you look at this model and it's like, hello, look at the ROI, just how, like you said, $6 million of fundraising and you've saved $40 million. I mean, that's just, oh man. Yeah. I'm not going to get too much into it, but yeah, it's just.
Yeah. I mean, it's a no-brainer. I mean, in the world of investing, on Wall Street, they would look at this as the most incredible, surefire bet that they've ever had.
Yep. Yeah. No, totally agree. Again, Chad, thank you again for your time. I'm going to spread the word amongst my friends, and I know one of my friends who's big time foodie, so I know he's going to love this and what you're doing.
Send him our way.
Well, I will do. No worries. That's easy to do with him. Awesome, Chad.
Thanks, Eric.
I appreciate it.
Have a great rest of your day.
You too. Thank you for listening to the Henry Zunkel podcast. Please like, subscribe, and leave us a review. If you would like to learn more about our nonprofit, please go to henryzunkel.org. As we say here at Henry Zunkel, you are loved, never judged.